Well, if there's any way that I can do something ahead of time with you and with Gilbert, I'm happy to do that. We just need to wait. He'll make sure I'm going to live someplace, so I will join you to help in the so that we can take care of it. You and I both know that things in that neighborhood are aggravated because of the paving project. Although that doesn't appear to be impacted more than it's already impacted. I mean, we've got buses running 30, 40 minutes behind just because of the traffic, but we also know it's a short-term thing. And, there wasn't a reason necessarily to address it. We're just trying to adjust our busing schedules and things like that so that we knew that they were going to run behind.
I can work with you. Okay. Okay. So continue from here. With liberty and justice for all.
Would you like to sit?
I'll move back here.
Hi, I'm Brent. You guys took about time.
It's either you or Antonio.
See you up there. Nothing else to talk about. Great.
Yeah.
In Sacramento. Is there a extent been here 7 starting to get crappy. Either I haven't been or I've been running from here.
Hey, how are you? Good to see you. How you been? I've been by yourself for a minute. Yeah. So where?
The surplus schools. I'll be here for
Thank you.
Well, good evening. Good evening and welcome to the regular meeting of the Riverside Unified School District's Board of Education. We have just returned from closed session where no action was taken, and we are now moving into our open session. And to get that started, I would like to invite the Arlington High School Air Force Junior ROTC Color Guard to come forward and present us with colors tonight. Come forward, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the flag salute. Place your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And thank you, Tariq Corey, right? That's your name? Who helped us tonight in leading us in the pledge. And thank you to the Junior ROTC from Arlington. And I think Mr. Lee would like to say a few words about
Yes,
Mr.
thank you. Great job, Tariq. Our pledge ambassador this evening is Tariq Corey. Tariq is a sixth grader at Lake Matthews Elementary, and he has attended the school since kindergarten. He's an excellent student who has consistently been on the honor roll and plays in the band. Tariq serves on the student leadership team and actively participates in all the leadership projects. Outside of school, Tariq plays basketball and practices Taekwondo, in which he holds a green belt. He also enjoys computer games and playing indoor games with his younger siblings. So, Tariq, did you bring some people with you today? See your family and your principal? You want to introduce them for us?
Yeah, I brought my family, my mom, Angela Corey, my dad, Gadas Corey, and my siblings, and also the principal and vice principal of Lake Matthews Elementary.
Well, good. Thank you. And we have a certificate for you, so come give you that.
Thank you. Thank you, Tariq. And you and your family are welcome to stay for the rest of the board meeting, or you may go home, too, if you don't want to sit and listen to all of our business. But we appreciate it. You sound like you're a really busy guy. What with all that video gaming and stuff. Just kidding. Thank you very much. And thanks, parents, for loaning us your son for tonight. All right, moving on to our first item on the agenda is our district superintendent's report. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. David Hanson.
Thank you, Madam President Lochnason. And again, thank you to our student who gave that wonderful Pledge of Allegiance and to the Air Force Junior ROTC at Arlington High School. Do you know that this Thursday is 67 years since the Air Force was established as a separate military branch in our country? And so very appropriate to have the Arlington Junior ROTC Air Force here as we recognize them and think that 67 years ago they became a separate branch in our military. Very grateful for the military and their service and the things that they do for us each and every day. Just to give an update, I have begun my classroom walkthroughs. You know that one of my goals this year is to get into every single classroom. And I've so far visited King High School, and this morning I had a chance to visit Mountain View Elementary School, and it has been a wonderful opportunity for me to meet the staff. Actually, I'm going early and asking the principals to hold a voluntary staff meeting. And so far, most of the staff are showing up, whether they're in the cafeteria or the classroom, and it has a chance for me to connect and to just spend some time with each of the teachers out or each of the staff members rather out at the school sites. And so I look forward to that. It's 2 to 3 schools every week, and I'll be finishing up in the springtime. But again, as you know, the board, my goal is to get into every classroom every year. Last week, on September the 8th, we held our first Superintendent Teachers Advisory Council. This was where we have asked the principals to recommend 2 teachers from their school site, one to come and then one as an alternate. We met in this room, and we're going to continue to meet. But it really is one of our goals as cabinet and as superintendent is to shrink the district. And where you have 2 teachers from every school site coming and spending every month with the executive cabinet, that's who's in these meetings. It's a chance for us to collaborate, to discuss ideas, to receive information from them, and also to provide them with information. It was a wonderful first meeting last September the 8th, and we look forward to many others. Last Thursday, for all of us, it was a somber time because Thursday was September the 11th. And I started my morning with many of you on the board and also executive cabinet members at Good Morning Riverside. And I framed my day around one of my core values that day, which was gratitude. Being grateful to the blessings of life, grateful to the gift of life itself, the people that you work with, your family, your community, your school system, things such as that. And as we saw the tribute at the end of Good Morning Riverside, realized that there was an opportunity for us later on that day. We had our first leadership management meeting. Every month, all 185 managers, certificated and classified, are coming together. And we meet at the Louis Van der Zyl gym, multi-purpose room once a month. And as we discussed last Thursday, we gave everyone a copy of the book, and I'm going to provide a copy of the book for all the board members. It's Patrick Lencioni's latest book. It's on it's called The Advantage, and it really discusses the disciplines that you need to have a healthy organization. And so we discussed that last week with the managers, and we introduced that, and we finished the day with the same tribute that we witnessed at Good Morning Riverside, and having a moment of silence rather, for all of the men, the women, the families that have been affected, that gave their lives, are affected to this day still because of when our country was under attack by terrorism back on September 11th, 2001. And then Saturday, I had a wonderful opportunity to meet here at this beautiful facility and participate in the Million Father March, a nationwide effort to engage fathers in their upbringing of their children. The event was sponsored by RUSD, the Latino Business Alliance, 52 Street Positive, and the Black Star Project. And although it was a hot time as we left the facilities here and we walked around the big block, or having a march, and we were singing cadences, and that fathers do matter, and I had a chance to keynote and to talk to the fathers and the parents there about the gifts that we can give to our children. Specifically, don't profess to be an expert, but having reared 6 kids and now grandfather 3, I learned a little bit and talked about the gifts of children, the importance of parenting, certainly fathers in the lives of their children. And so it was a wonderful event. There'll be many more like it, and we'll certainly keep the board updated and informed as those opportunities come our way. I'd like to invite our Chief Academic Officer, Ms. Carmody, to come up and give a report on things that are happening in instructional services.
Thanks so much for allowing me to share on behalf of Dr. Hansen. At that leadership meeting that we had last Thursday, we also started the first steps to goal setting with our management team, which will involve leadership and also preparing college, career, and world-ready students. And the idea is that that would align completely to the LCAP as well. Highlighting a couple of things in technology, we have the Brunswick Communication Group coming out to see us at the end of the month on behalf of the Gates Foundation to look at our Gates Next Generation Phase 2 implementation. Over the weekend, we co-partnered with EdSurge for a tech summit for educators. So that's pretty exciting, and that was at USC over this last weekend. We also are going to be having the Executive Cabinet of Guru coming out to hold their Board of Directors meeting here in Riverside. So we definitely are a place that people want to come and be part of as far as innovation goes in technology. Today we had our first Change of Principle workshop. So this is the opportunity that we're providing the sites to look at the practices that were previous to the school and maybe need some attention or that they want to celebrate, so that they then will communicate back to the new principal, and together they collaborate on making the school even stronger. So that's pretty exciting, and that happened today. We continue with the implementation of the state standards. I know we're going to be having a board study session at the end of the month for that implementation of Common Core and also for the LCAP. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Carmody. And the last couple of things, I want to thank the staff members that are here. I know that our Deputy Superintendent, Mr. Mike Fine, and his staff, and Assistant Superintendent, Dr. Kirk Lewis, and his staff have some presentations later today. Just grateful for the effort, the work that has gone in to prepare these presentations as we move through the program, through the agenda. And then just the last thing, the Superintendent Board Shared Governance workshop that we've talked about scheduling. We will reschedule from this Saturday to within the next couple of weeks, and Cheryl Anderson will get a hold of each of you, and we'll reschedule so that we can have the Superintendent Board Governance Shared Workshop. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hansen. And thank you, Ms. Carmody. There's a lot of interesting things going on in the district right now. We are at the part of our agenda where we accept public input for items that are not agendized or not on the agenda, and I haven't received any cards, so I am assuming we don't have any public input. And I'm getting nods from the back of the room that is the case. Thank you. So we'll move on now to Mr. Tim Martin, who will give us our district employee group report for the month from the Riverside City Teachers Association. Mr. Martin, hello, good evening.
Good evening, President Lockdawson, Dr. Hanson, and members of the board. Last month I commented that I would like to talk with you throughout the year on the conditions of teaching and learning in our classrooms and in our schools. There's a lot of good to report. Dr. Hanson, your communications about Kids First and your visibility at schools throughout the district have had a positive impact. Teachers and counselors, psychologists and nurses tell me that your beliefs and encouragements are resonating with them and are good to hear. You're taller than I am. The consensus among teachers on the 2 Common Core professional development days was that they were helpful and worthwhile. They were very impressed with the content, the preparation, and the trainers. Those days were very well received. The efforts of all the folks in instructional services laid the groundwork for good teaching and learning in the first days of school. From what I have heard so far, the staff collaboration times are being well used by teachers in the manner for which these days were intended. Working together in teams and grade levels, making shared professional decisions about instructional practices every week is a great thing for teachers and our kids. Air conditioning in our classrooms has worked better than in any year since I have been in this role. Though, as you might have guessed, today was a bit taxing on them, and I heard about it. Because a comfortable classroom is a pretty important condition for good teaching and learning, on behalf of all of our teachers and students, thanks to those of you on the board and district managers who made this a priority, and to our colleagues who know how to fix air conditioners. Your efforts have made a big difference. In the past, at about this time of year, I have commented on the razor-thin staffing margin and the annual mass migration of students. The staffing margin has been generous at the outset and has been increasingly generous as staffing decisions have been made this school year. Consequently, there are fewer classrooms filled with the maximum number of students, and there will be fewer students whose teachers are not the same as those with whom they started the school year. Who can question the value of this practice on teaching and learning? Thank you for making this tangible expression of support for teachers and students. I think in general, teachers are embracing the Common Core standards. They appreciate the emphasis on higher level thinking skills and the depth of content knowledge expected of students. They also are pleased with the professional latitude given to them in making instructional decisions. However, they are struggling with instructional materials and units of study. The amount of instructional materials being provided is proving to be unmanageable, and the effort required to understand them in order to make good instructional decisions is unsustainable. Teachers are becoming increasingly concerned about the availability of vetted instructional materials and units of study and the expenditure of time and energy necessary to effectively implement the units of study which they are currently teaching. It should be a top priority of the district to provide teachers with easily accessible units of study that are focused and refined with ample lead time to make well thought out and well designed lesson plans. I don't think there is anything more important than making better Common Core curriculum for the sake of our teachers and our students. Thanks for listening, and can I answer any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Martin. We do have a question from Mr. Lee.
Hi, Mr. Martin. How are you?
I'm doing well, Mr. Lee.
So, your reference to lack of instructional materials. Are teachers finding they just don't have the resources to purchase these materials, or that their materials that do exist haven't been vetted? What is the biggest concern?
Well, it's not a lack. I really think, and I've had really good discussions with Dr. Hansen and Mrs. Carmen Day and Mr. Garcia and Mrs. Paredes about this. I think it's certainly not a lack. It's an overabundance. And my analogy is it's just this buffet of exquisite food, and it's being put in front of teachers, and some teachers are able to manage that well with energy, and others, I think, are getting overwhelmed by it. So I think that's really the issue at this point. It's not a lack of material in the courses of study. It's just the abundance that's coming to them and the ability to kind of tailor it to meet the needs of their kids.
So are teachers telling you they feel like they're kind of on their own to kind of go through these materials and figure out what works best for them? Or
They are.
They are.
They are.
Have teachers collaborate?
And that's part of the professional latitude they appreciate, on the one hand, and I also think they appreciate working with their colleagues every week on the other hand. Those are both very good things. I think what would be helpful to them would be to streamline what's being provided, so they can make decisions in a manner that isn't exhausting, really, and they can continue to do throughout the year on all the units of study they're going to be doing all year long. And I think that's really kind of the issue right now. I think there's this fear among teachers that I'm hearing at all levels that they're not sure they can sustain the effort they're putting into what they're doing right now. They love it, but it's a bit tiring for them.
Thank you. Ms. Cloud has a comment.
Well, thank you for beating my drum, Mr. Martin. You know, I've been concerned about some of those issues because Common Core is a huge implementation issue sent down from above, and it's amorphous, and so to pick and choose, that's why the standards were adopted to help teachers, you know, produce materials for the classroom. And so I just think we, as you have suggested, need to be real careful about preparing teachers, because those teachers that are outstanding teachers will run themselves ragged trying to do the best they can, and those teachers that will just give up because there's so much material are, you know, going to harm our kids. So I just think we need to be careful in the implementation.
Thank you.
And I hope I made clear in my comments that this is not reflective of effort at all from instructional services.
we know.
I think they are working their tails off, doing the best they can. I just think trying to manage it in a better way for teachers' daily use would be beneficial.
I think we
Okay.
get that.
Yeah,
Right.
and I'll just
Thank you.
close out. So one thing I take that very seriously, and I want to make sure that we, you know, this is all new to us, and I know that our staff is looking at this, like this is we've got adaptive loops in place here. So I think we need to maybe look at this a little bit more closely in instruction too, and maybe talk about it and how we can see what's missing or what we can do better. So I think I'll talk to you later about that, or Dr. Hansen. We'll get that on there.
Right.
And if I might add, remember that we do have we're scheduling a board study session later this month where we'll have a 3-hour time just to talk specifically about transition to Common Core and the rollout of our LCAP plan.
Yeah, so that's
and
what-
so that's just going to happen within the next few weeks, and staff will be prepared to share that with you.
I know, yeah, I've heard it described as a fire hose of information, so it's something.
That would maybe be one way of putting it. I tried to be a little more professional, but that does give you the image.
Well, thank you, as usual, Mr. Martin, for your astute and very respective comments, so appreciate that. So we are at our consent agenda. These are routine items that we take as a block, and Mrs. Cloud?
I move approval of the items.
Okay, we have and Mr. Hunt? Or?
Second.
Okay, Mrs. Cloud moves approval, Mr. Hunt seconds approval of the consent calendar. Please vote when you get a little flashing light. There you go. Now, okay. All right, the item carries. Thank you. All right. Item E1. I think we're going to hear from Dr. Lewis on our Measure B Citizens Oversight Committee. This is a routine annual report that we're given every year. This is from the previous year. Dr. Lewis.
Yes, Mrs. Locke-Dawson, Dr. Hanson, members of the board. As Mrs. Locke-Dawson mentioned, this is an annual report that our Citizens Oversight Committee presents to you. As I present Mr. Mark Cloud, he's our newly elected chairperson. I just wanted to mention that this is one of the best committees that I am associated with and get to work with since the inception of Measure B. Very professional folks that join us, many of those you appointed to the committee, and I thank you for that because it's been a great experience and one that where you have a lot of cooperation with folks with various expertise. Just a little bit about the report as a reminder. The report that we have is a cumulative report of every Measure B project from the very beginning. So if anyone wants to pull the report off of our website, they can look back to the very beginning and see what projects were implemented at any school, the amounts and all the financials that are associated with that. Very comprehensive report, and it's getting thicker and thicker every year as we bring it forward to you. So I'd like to introduce Mr. Mark Cloud. He'll present the report for you. Thank you.
Good evening, Dr. Hanson, Board President Locke-Dawson, members of the RUSD Board. My name is Mark Cloud, as Dr. Lewis said, and it's been a pleasure to be on this committee, I have to say, over the last couple of years. And I'm really happy to be here tonight to share with you our findings of this year's report. But before I begin, I'd like to ask if there are other members of the committee here tonight to please stand. Thank you so much. And thank you. The group is really committed. It's a great group of citizen volunteers. And I did promise Dairy Queen tonight to whoever came, so looks like it's going to be you and me, Krista. All right. Great. So, to begin, a brief summary of our activities. Since 2002, the committee has met 65 times. We've had a chance to not only review very detailed documents from the district, but also from the independent auditing agencies that report to the district. So that's been great. We've also had a chance to meet with, at these meetings, district staff to not only interface with them directly, but also ask them very pointed, timely, important questions that we feel like need to be asked, and they are always there to answer the questions. So that's been great. One of the really interesting things and really neat things about being on this committee is we've had a chance to we go to each of the school sites, or we actually we alternate school sites for our meetings, so we can get to see firsthand the some of the Measure B implementation projects that are going on, and that's been really great because we've got to see things like the Poly High School pool, the John W. North athletic facilities, ADA implementation at a lot of the schools throughout the district. So that's been great too. It's been a very democratic, very transparent process to be a part of. And so in addition to, as I said, we reviewed all the financial reports, and that includes the project's implementation master plan. As for the building fund summary, the committee would like to report that $175 million of the first, second, and third issuances of Measure B funds have been appropriated. With the addition of bond premium dollars and the interest generated, the total of funds now available for Measure B projects is $186,618,886. Of that amount, more than $172.5 million has been appropriated for specific projects, leaving just over $14 million having yet to be committed to specific projects. And that's now up on the screen. In its review of the reports provided by both district staff and the independent agencies tasked with auditing Measure B expenditures, the committee has found that Measure B funds have been appropriately committed to Measure B projects. The funds have not been dispersed for any teacher or administrative salaries or other school operating expenses. The committee has also found that all Measure B projects have been completed at or under budget, which is very impressive. And in its review of the general obligation bonds performance audit and the current RUSD financial audit, the committee finds that these documents are in accord with the restricted expenditure of Measure B funds. Finally, tonight, the committee would like to report that it has found that Measure B funds are being used as they ought to be, and that the current accountability procedures should be continued. They work really well. On a final note, the committee would like to commend RUSD staff, everyone responsible for implementing Measure B projects at the schools throughout the district. Each project has a million moving parts, as you all know, and each part is looked after meticulously by the people in this room and a lot of the people at the school level. So we are all really impressed. It's been great to be on this committee to see these things firsthand, and we just want to thank the board for being, and the district for being so transparent, democratic, and for doing such a great job of implementing these projects. With that, I yield my time, and I thank you for allowing us to report tonight. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Cloud. Mr. Hunt.
Mr. Cloud, thank you for your service and that of your committee on this very important general obligation bond, and it's important we have the kind of integrity that you described as we probably will begin to talk about this in our community again, because Measure B isn't that 12 years old now, I think, or 11 years old. Help me understand something, so if I'm asked these questions out there. Sometimes on these pages we have I'll go to page 94, I just picked it. It was a Gage Middle School Shade Structure and Security Edition. The project budget amount was $93,578. The amount expended was $92,956. Great. But there are so many of them, and on the next page, it's Frank Augustus Miller Middle School. The project budget amount and the project number expended are exactly the same. Are we just fantastic at budgeting and hitting it on the number, or how is that explained to your committee? How we, as you say, we come in at budget or under, but this is something that I think we questioned a little bit about. How do you present that?
Well, that's a great question. It's presented in a very straightforward way. When projects are, when they're at budget, when projects don't deviate from their initial intent, or from how they're begun on paper, when they hit the mark, it's very straightforward. There's no reason to deviate. So, that's how it's explained to us, essentially. For very specific questions about the financial accounting, I will refer you to members of the staff. So if you want something more specific than that, you'll have to ask them.
My young friend, I was not picking on you, but I wanted to see what the staff is helping you to. I mean, I'm sure it comes as, you can pick, I can pick a lot of them in here that come out the same number. So, but I want to see how they helped you explain that. Explain it to your committee. Page 99, University Middle School. Exact same number that was budgeted. I mean, we're either really good at this, and we can claim we come in on budget or under, or how are we getting there? Are they helping you to understand that? Because since you're our ambassadors out there, is it through change orders or?
There have been change orders that have taken place. Projects have changed over time, and Dr. Lewis Dr. Mike Fine can explain that more fully. But yes, projects have changed over time from the moment they were bid to the moment they were completed. And so all kinds of things come into play, but that's one of the things that comes into play is change orders. Another thing that comes into play is the changing financial times. Bids that came in at during the recession, changed. So lots of factors come into play there.
I think he either has a sciatic nerve, he needs to stand up, or he wants to help you answer that question. So let's see.
So in fairness to Mr. Cloud and the committee, the example you gave, one was a very small project that was fully funded by Measure B, so the budget was
X and the expenses were Y. In the case of Frank Miller Augustus Middle School, it's a very large, complex project with multiple funding sources. Measure B is only one of the many funding sources that built Miller Middle School. The state contributed, several CFDs contributed, and so in this case, the budget out of Measure B that the committee's responsible for was X. The amount charged to that budget was exactly X. All the other funding sources, if you look at the total project, probably didn't come out exactly the same. But for Measure B, the amount came out exactly the same because we fully maximized the Measure B portion right down to the penny for that project.
So let's look at a small one where the University Heights Middle School fencing, $33,600. Amount extended was $33,600. So are we funding to what, and we're creating the budget at what we spent? Are we creating a budget that says we're going to spend $35,000 at University Middle School? This is what our estimate is. This is what our...
So the budget is a little bit of a moving target. It follows the design process. And so a conceptual design would assign, in your example, $35,000 for a 100-foot fence, just making it up.
Sure.
And then when it gets to design, a more detailed design, and a cost estimate provided by the construction manager and probably the architect both would have refined that down to $1,300. Then when we actually bid, it bid at $33,100. We would have adjusted the budget each step of the way until the project was awarded. Then we would have fixed the budget at that point.
Okay, so in that scenario, you and I came up with the mythical $35,000. How do we tell our committee and the public? Because you can understand, I think, when the public looks at this and I say, oh yeah, we came in on budget, they're going to go, Tom, you guys are either got to take over everything or something's kind of funky here. So how do we know what the budget was and how close we came to it?
So over time, the committee actually gets, at each of their meetings, a status update on every open project, and it has some of that detail on there. But when we cut it off at the end of the year that the report dates produced for the year ending, we're still on, I've lost track. We're still in October or now in June? We're cutting it off. Yeah, so as of June 30th, when we cut that off, it's whatever we're reporting at that point in time. But the committee, when they meet, they get every other month when they meet, they get a detail sheet on that project. If they looked at those sheets from meeting to meeting, they would probably see some variation from meeting to meeting, depending on where it's at in its planning stage.
I'm going to leave this to the rest of the board, and I'd like us to talk about it at one of our retreats or something, to have this as a subject. But as we begin to work with Dr. Hanson and Mike and Dr. Lewis on a future GO bond, I personally feel that, while I appreciate this, I would like to have more, and I'm sure Mr. Cloud's Measure B and the future Measure X committee would like to have. I just don't think it's congruent and fair to say to our people we serve, yeah, we came in on budget at Martin Luther King High School Stadium, and wow, wasn't that amazing, a $3.1 million project, and we hit it right on the nose. I think we need to show what was budgeted. And whether we went over or under is just part of the process. I'm not embarrassed to say either one of those because everybody knows. I mean, nobody has remodeled the kitchen yet that came in on time.
I think your point, Mr. Hunt, is that we're just provide a realistic picture of how we spent. So I think that's a good point, and we should do it. That's not your fault, Mr. Cloud. I think it's
no.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fine. Mrs. Cloud, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Cloud, and your committee for your hard work. I have a quick question. Is the $14 million that hasn't been committed, does the committee, maybe, I don't know if you know or not, does your committee stay to the bitter end until the entire amount of money is spent? Is that how it works?
Yes.
So you might be back next year giving a report on the last $14 million then?
Yes, exactly. That's
Till
how it
it's
works.
zero.
Till it's zero, exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank
wonderful
you.
report, and we appreciate your service.
Yeah, you got it, no problem. Any other questions? All right, thanks.
Thank you very much. Next item is item F1, and this is an action item to pass a resolution to, it's our REACH Leadership Academy, so I'm just going to leave it at that, and I'm going to let Mr. Fine talk to us about what the resolution involves. Mr. Fine?
Thank you. Good evening, Mrs. Lock-Dawson, Dr. Hanson, and members of the board. The item, Resolution 11, that's before you is a unique item. We've not seen this before. Hopefully we won't see it too often. But as the board's well aware, public school districts are actually exempt from many local planning and zoning ordinances. And that exemption extends to charter schools when we allow it to. And we don't have to allow it to. It's your choice to do so. In this particular case, and you know from a recent update from the REACH Leadership Academy, that they have had to change locations due to continued growth. So the good news is for them continued growth. The bad news is that they've had to change locations after being at one location for their first several years. For this school year, they will be at a location, a new location, and then they have already begun the long-term planning to be at a more suitable location a year from now. In that move over the summer, they were moving to a long-established school location, private school affiliated with a church location, and their use is absolutely consistent with that prior use. And so they did not initiate the conditional use permit process in a timely fashion, given its history, thinking that it would extend to them, and that's not the case. And so with the city staff's concurrence, Resolution 11 has been prepared to exempt them from the zoning that would have normally process that would have normally come about through the conditional use permit. They are not exempt from any other permitting processes such as fire, building code, any of the other normal building occupancy types of permits and processes the city may require. Only the zoning, and this would be for 1 year for this period of time.
And when does that start? You're in your current location, so it would be next year.
No,
right?
it would start, if you adopt it tonight, it would start tomorrow.
Okay.
The exemption would go into place tomorrow.
Okay. Mr. Hunt?
Thank you, Ms. Lock-Dawson. So, Mike, where are they? You said they're going to be here for a year, but they're planning to move somewhere else after that?
That's correct. They are working with a property owner and the city, actually. They've already started the process with the city at a site out close to UCR. Okay, so that's the grading plan they were talking about. Yes, sir. Et cetera. I assume they also know they need to get a CUP there. They do, and their consultants are working on that. Okay. I think the confusion over the temporary site on Harupa was that it was a school site and has been for 50-plus years. Mm-hmm. Their use was absolutely consistent with that, and so they just kind of thought that step probably would be, I don't want to put words in it, or thoughts in their mind, what their thinking was, but they skipped over that step, and that's not permissible. A CUP, when it's not used, expires in? Yeah.
6 months.
6 months. And I think that's actually the issue. It's been vacant as a school for longer than 6 months. If you have no other questions, then I would move approval of this motion, which needs a supermajority, I think. Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Hunt and a second by Mrs. Cloud to pass a resolution to approve the CUP. Please vote when you get a flashing light. There you go. Okay.
Commend our staff for working with REACH to make this come about.
All right, that motion carries. Thank you. Good luck and good news that you're expanding. That's good. Heard lots of good things about the Academy. Thank you very much. This is a fun one. Dr. Lewis, this is our 7-Eleven committee. You're going to talk to us about our real property.
Yes, Mrs. Lock-Dawson, members of the board, Dr. Hanson, this document has been placed at your working area. We're starting on page 330 of your board packet if you'd like to follow it that way. Just wanted to mention that the Real Property Advisory Committee, or the 7-Eleven Committee, is a requirement of the Ed Code. You may ask, well, why is it called 7-Eleven? It's not because of a convenience store, but it's because you have to have a minimum of 7 or a maximum of 11 members on the committee. It's important for you to understand that we're not recommending that you sell property, that you exchange property, or lease property. This is a one step of the process. Should you decide that we have properties that we'd like to put up for sale or long-term lease or exchange, we've completed this one phase of the process. So your action tonight is to accept the committee's recommendation, and they have the properties that they're going to explain to you. So I want to be sure it's clear that we're not taking any action on any of these properties. In fact, we'll wait until we have other indicators, market conditions, and other dynamic factors that we want to consider so that at a later date we may elect to go in that direction. So I'd like to introduce Haley Calhoun, our Director of Planning and Development. She was our point person as staff member to work the committee. Very powerful committee that all of you, again, had a part in appointing members to. They did a great job, and I think you'll find the report is spot on. Haley?
Thank you.
Good evening, President Dawson and Dr. Hanson and members of the board. As Dr. Lewis did a great job explaining the purpose of the 7-Eleven committee, I'm just here to talk a little bit more about what our charge was as a committee. And, you know, as a district, we are responsible for all of our assets, including any real property that we have. And if we determine at any time that the real property no longer serves in educational or operational uses, then it's our charge to make sure that we are managing those assets to the best value of the district. And so that's one of the reasons the 7-Eleven committee is formed, is to look at those assets and determine if any of those assets could be used as surplus, and if they are determined to be surplus, would they be best to sell, lease, or exchange. Another goal of this committee was to provide as much flexibility as possible to the board. As he explained, this is a compliance issue that we need to meet, and also identifying properties and then identifying them as possible sell, lease, or exchange gives the board flexibility on what they want to do with those properties. And so we tried to provide as much flexibility as possible through our report. And again, just to reiterate that we are just an advisory committee. And so your charge tonight is just to accept our report and our findings, but again, not to take action. The report actually has no expiration date, and neither does the committee. And so at any time, if you needed to update or find more information or wanted to revisit the properties, the committee could be reconvened at any time. And so I've made sure the committee members know that this is a lifetime commitment for any time that we need them back. But again, any further action on the properties, as Dr. Lewis explained, is certainly a board prerogative, and there is no timeline or expiration date on that. Before I move to introducing the committee chair, I wanted to first recognize Alex Parslow. She was our consultant. Stand up, Alex. She is from School Advisors, which is a division of HMC Architects, and I see that Marco, one of the principal architects from HMC, is also here, and I appreciate his support. She was here to be my coach, if you will, through this process. The last time this process was initiated was about 15 years ago, so long before my time as a director. So I appreciated her support in coaching and through the process, making sure that we had all our I's dotted and our T's crossed, and we're meeting all the requirements for the committee and the public hearings. And also, the 7-Eleven committee is made purely up of community members, and those were members that were appointed by the board members, and they also represent different community memberships. And because it is a community committee, we did elect a chair and a co-chair, and I'm actually going to let them do the report and the presentation. But first, let me recognize and introduce Michael West, who was our chairperson. And our co-chair was Stephanie Standifer. She's unable to meet tonight, but they both did an excellent job leading our committee, and he's going to continue, Michael's going to continue with the presentation and giving you the introduction of the committee, their process, their findings, and recommendations. Michael.
You don't have anybody else from the committee here tonight, do you?
He's going to introduce it.
Okay. It doesn't look like there's anybody there.
There's my click forward. Forward. Okay. Good evening, President Locke Dawson, Dr. Hanson, members of the board, members of the community. I had the opportunity to chair the committee. It was a great experience, something I hadn't previously been involved in. But what I wanted to do is give you an overview of the process. It started about a year ago. on September 3rd when you authorized the formation of the Real Property Advisory Committee here. On February 18th, we were appointed. I think there was 10 of us. I'll get to it, but we were all appointed. And it's consisted essentially of 5 meetings and 2 public hearings per requirements. And then the 7-Eleven committee has unanimously approved the report that we're presenting to you today. And today is the day where you either accept a report or reject it. The sites discussed were a 1.72 acre site along Van Buren near King High School, 20 acres of agricultural property at Cleveland and Myers, the old Hawthorne property, Hawthorne Elementary, which is right under 7 acres, the current district office property in downtown, Grant Education Center in downtown, as well as the STEM Academy. Committee members, as I said, I chaired. Stephanie Standifer was co-chair. Is Raul Ayala? No, didn't make it. Oswaldo Barajas, Finn Comer, Shawnee Dahl, I saw her back there, Bob Garcia, Chuck Krieger, Christopher Manning, he was here, Tim Maloney, and Matthew Webb. The process consisted, our first general meeting, which wasn't necessarily classified as a meeting, we sat down, went over the responsibilities that we would have as being members of this committee, went through Brown Act requirements, and made sure that there weren't any conflict of interest for any of the members of the committee. First meeting was April 21st, and that consisted of virtual tours of the site as well as presentation of the demographics, enrollment figures, student population projections, things of that nature. Second meeting consisted of site discussions, so specific to each site. We prioritized whether we thought they should be sale, lease, or trade. Our third meeting consisted of reviewing our previous priority list to make sure that we were all comfortable with it, that we all agreed upon it. And then we also reviewed the state funding due to the fact that Old Hawthorne used state funds and that any sales proceeds that come from selling that property, 50% will need to go back to the state. In regards to any of the other sites, we didn't run into that issue whatsoever. The first public hearing was meeting 4, that's July 7th. We didn't receive anyone there. Meeting number 5 was August 14th. Same situation, no public input. And then essentially after that, 7-Eleven committee approved the report that we've presented today. And 6 of those properties that we reviewed, we've recommended as surplus. We did not recommend the STEM Academy as surplus. And that occurred at the May 28th meeting, in which we decided STEM would not be surplus. This is the first site here. It fronts Van Buren, prime commercial property, kind of a perfect box. This is the agricultural land here at Cleveland and Myers. It's 20 acres. It's currently being tended by an operator. This is the old Hawthorne property with the train in the background there. District office and the Grant Education Center downtown. The findings from our research were that over the next 5 years we expect stable enrollment. There's excess student capacity, meaning that there's sufficient classrooms for the projections of students in the district. The properties that we did decide to surplus are not currently designed to provide direct instructional support or can't be utilized at this time based on... Do you have a question? Oh, okay, sorry. And we decided that there was no educational, administrative, or operational need for the 5 properties. As I stated, the 7-Eleven committee voted to not surplus the STEM Academy, and we also elected to provide the board with the ability to have a waiver, which is it's kind of like a bid waiver, so that if you want to open up, typically it functions as a sealed bid process, but you have the ability to have an open bid process, kind of like an auction of sorts, if you decide to move forward with it. And as I said, 5 of the 6 properties were declared surplus, and we then provided the recommendation for what we think that order of surplus should be. So for Van Buren, first option should be to sell, then lease, then exchange, in that order. Cleveland and Myers, we recommended to sell first as well. Old Hawthorne property to sell first. Same with the district office property, and we recommended that long-term lease be signed or handled for Grant Education Center. And that's it. Any questions?
Yeah, I think we do have a few questions, so I'll hold mine for just a minute while Mrs. Cloud.
Well, perhaps, and thank you and your committee for serving us. I'm still a little fuzzy on the process and why the district office in Smithers and Grant would be declared surplus, because they're actually being used to benefit, students. So how is that declared surplus?
The surplus designation just allows the board flexibility. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we're stating you should sell today or immediately. It's that in the event, let's say, a new district office is desired or something along those lines, you have the ability to sell. In terms of Grant, same thing, because currently I believe it's on a 1-year lease or short-term lease. When you declare it as surplus, it provides the ability to sign a long-term lease. So it's providing flexibility.
So it provides flexibility. So without that flexibility, then we wouldn't be able to sell the property or do whatever we felt is needed. Okay, I get it.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Lee.
Thank you for chairing the committee, Michael. That's awesome.
Thank you.
What role did the consultant and the architect have on the committee? In the process?
Guiding us through the process, making sure everything was done according to state guidelines. They helped extensively with the report. They pretty much brought it all together and made sure we were in line. That included, I had regular meetings with the consultant to make sure that everything was moving along according to plans, et cetera.
Thank you. Mr. Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. West, and your committee for this important effort you undertook, because, like you said, it hadn't been done in a dozen years. I hope the board won't wait that long again. We need to always be, as Mrs. Cloud points out, this gives us flexibility. I did see that in the Grant School there was something in here. There's been a request for a longer-term lease.
Correct.
And I certainly, I'm really talking to those behind you, Mr. West. I want to be sure that before that's even considered, it's brought to the board, because the longer-term lease would tie us up for a while. Why did you decide to take the STEM school off from surplus?
There's a lot going on with the. It was just kind of, for us, when we discussed it, it was kind of a hot button topic, and we thought that there was a lot of moving parts that needed to be hashed out or taken care of before we kind of stepped into that role as well.
So you want us to have the hot button then?
Pretty much.
All right. All right, Mr. West. I think this is very helpful and helps us to understand what we have and what we have to work with. And again, I compliment the committee and thank all of you. I hope we'll have a way to have you back. And I would move for approval if there's no more questions, Mrs. Lock-Dawson.
Okay, I'll table that.
Best report I've seen in my time on the board.
I was just
assembled.
I want to thank you as well. I have to say I'm really impressed with this report. I'm not sure, Dr. Lewis, if this was your doing or if you did it with help from HMC or the consultant, but this is exactly, I've been on the board now 3 years. This is exactly kind of thing that it's really helpful to us when we make decisions, because it clearly lays out why things are good, why they're bad, what we can do with them, what our options are. It gives us the information we need to make decisions. One thing I did want to ask you, Mr. West, was if you felt that the committee was, I don't know what your background is, because I never met you before tonight.
Commercial real estate.
Well, and I know you have a couple other ones on there too.
Right.
So did you feel that the makeup of the committee was sufficient or helpful, or there was a lot of good information there that the members could provide to help you formulate these opinions?
Definitely. As I said, I work in commercial real estate. We had a few other individuals from that industry. We had, I believe, an attorney, multiple consultants, an architect, environmental consultant, members of the community. So as well as, I think we had 2 or 3 teachers as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we, covered the gamut of possibilities or individuals who would have input.
Yeah, I think we all took those appointments very seriously, because I think this was something we were all looking to make sure was a very useful document when it came out. So I know, are you Mr. Lee's appointee?
Yes.
Okay, because he called you Michael.
Yes.
On the other one. I think we called you Mr. West. Well, good. I really appreciate your time. I know it was big, and Dr. Lewis, for your leadership. I think credit goes to you, right? And staff too. And Haley. Sorry, where are you? I'm sorry. Haley, there you are back there. So I want to make sure credit goes where credit is due, but mostly to the people who weren't being paid for this. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So, and the consultant as well, and the architect. So, Mr. Hunt.
It's just one thing, as we're talking about wonderful reports, I would ask that Dr. Lewis and his staff, I'll leave my book here tonight, but I would like to have back in a bound the entire Measure B report. I think we'd all like to have that for our shelves. This is the sort of thing, you're a part-time public official, having these at our fingertips are very important, and so I would just ask for that, if that can be done. I wanted to ask Mr. Fine one question, just had to do with,
Yeah.
and when we talk about
Come on down, Mr. Fine.
Mr. West, some of your recommendations are to sell, lease, exchange. When we lease, Mr. Fine, do we, and I'm thinking about the Gibson, not the Gibson, the Greenbelt property.
Cleveland Myers.
Yeah, do we, or at Grant, do we encumber some sort of taxable situation because it's non-education income?
So just for some technical clarity, we don't lease either of those properties right now because it would be illegal until they're declared surplus. So they are licensed for use, but there's not a lease on either of the properties.
They're licensed?
They're licensed for use. There's not a lease on either properties because you have to go through this process in order to lease any school facility, and neither of those properties had gone through until your action tonight. But a commercial use of a otherwise tax-exempt property does trigger leasehold type of interest in property tax. And in the case of Cleveland and Myers, that is the case off the top of my head, about $1,600 a year. And the current caretaker of that property pays us to pay that. So that there's no money out of our pocket.
Was the findings that is the market, if we wanted to sell, not that I'm saying we do, is the market rebounding that we'd want to look at that for some of these properties, or?
Well, I think that would be the logical next step for us to go through, is some type of market analysis. That obviously wasn't the role of the committee. But for those properties that we may have a interest, everybody I think is very familiar, any type of analysis like that's time sensitive. You do it, by the time you even talk about it 3 months later, you may have to do it again. And so when the board's ready to start those longer-term conversations, the conversation about the longer-term use or what we want to do with the property, that would be the time to start. The next thing to do would be to start the market analysis.
Thank you, Ms. Lockdown.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Frank.
Also, actually, that was the thought that came to mind was next steps. So I'm not sure if you're the one to speak to that, but are we talking about rolling this into a strategic plan or business plan for the district at some point, where we're looking at moving facilities, or is this something that may feed into if we start talking about a bond, a geo bond?
So I think it's a little of both. It's they're kind of disparate properties, if you will. So I don't know that I would treat them all together or treat them all in the same way. The old Hawthorne site has very limited future potential for any of our own use. There's vacant property next to it. There's housing developments around it. It is probably of the list the most logical one to start a discussion about, begin to look at market analysis and things like that. I think that's very different than, say, a Grant Education Center, where there is a district use going on there right now through a third-party partner that's saving our general fund considerable amount of money. And so those are very disparate. Cleveland and Myers, I think, is 6 months ago, I probably would have said the same thing about it as I just said about Hawthorne after the Riverside conversations we've had and the potential interest by farmers to be to plant and to farm our land and turn around and sell the produce to our food service. Those opportunities haven't always been there. So with some partner assistance and a plan by the city to help really facilitate that, I think, who knows where that potential could go. Van Buren, of course, has long, you're very familiar with the Van Buren lot here. The back part is a retention basin. The front part is always envisioned it having appropriate commercial use consistent with our neighbors. However, if there's other property acquisition to be done related to King High School, you're going to want to hold on to that because that's your access to that other property. So there's a million different variables here, and they vary widely by each of these properties.
So if and when, I'm assuming we're going to approve this tonight, to surplus these properties, if Mr. West walked in the door tomorrow, or one of his colleagues or something, I don't know, it would come in and say, I would really like to buy that. Are we in a position then to sell ones that have been recommended for purchase?
So if you act tonight to receive it, then if an offer like that were to come back, we would start that dialogue with you probably in today's environment, like in a committee, and then let it kind of work its way through the process to see what the level of interest is, and then begin the technical next steps.
Does anybody have a first right of refusal? Is there anything,
Yes.
or is this, yes?
For any public property held by a school district, there is a entire process of other government agencies and nonprofits,
I assume
charter
so.
schools that come in line. So the old Hawthorne site is a very frequent inquiry by charter schools. And all I simply do is send them the railroad safety report that we commissioned a number of years ago and say, read this and then let me know if you're an interest. You truly have an interest. They do have first rights to the property. Not a single one's ever called back after they've read the report. It's not safe for kids to be there. That was the board's determination many years ago. The state agreed with that. That's hard to overcome that report from a student safety perspective.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fine. Appreciate it. Mr. Hunt, no? Did you have a motion?
Mike, just the other thing is, you talked about the public process if we have to sell, but then, as Dr. Beatty used to talk about, it's always the advantage of exchanging.
Yes.
Doing that. Can this also allow the board, I don't know, has a landowner, and I'm not envisioning we do this, but just if it's there, could we participate by putting our land in a deal that, and do a public-private partnership if someone was going to build a medical center and we would get rent off it? I'm just saying.
So I think Michael and the committee did you a favor by giving you options and gave you options in their opinion in a particular order. And as you pointed out to you, 4 of them are in one order and there's one exception in the order there. So they included sale, lease, and exchange. Aren't a whole lot of other ways to go about it. Those are really the 3 ways. So they've given you their recommendation to give you full flexibility. And so there are ways to do lots of things. All of those, straight sale is the simplest thing to do, or a straight lease is the simplest thing to do. Exchanges, some type of long-term property ownership with the vertical improvement being somebody else's investment, and all those things are all possibilities. We just have to explore what the interest is. All kinds of things that attorneys can dream up will probably fit in one of these categories.
And if we did take the sales route and we had to go through the public process, let's just say it's the county of Riverside, they have to have a legitimate reason that they want it. And don't they usually end up paying less than we can get from Mr. West and his clients? Mr.
Aaron, I'd have to go back and refresh my memory of that code section. I'm not sure the reason has to be something that we would agree with. It has to be a legitimate public reason, because they're a public agency, in your example, the county. But that burden, I think, is theirs, and we wouldn't get the option probably to say we like your reason or we don't like your reason. If we're going to go through that process, that's kind of their call. But yes, there is a discount to the market value of the property when a nonprofit or government agency is the other party.
Right. Thank you for those. I would move my question.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve and a second by Mr. Lee. Please vote. Thank you. That item carries. Appreciate your service again. Next up, another action item, another resolution. And I'm not even going to start on the title of that resolution. I'm going to let Mr. Fine talk about it, because I think we have two that are related to each other, F3 and F4, so I'll let you speak to those.
Good evening again, Mrs. Lock-Dawson, Dr. Hanson, and members of the board. I am going to make a presentation that will, in essence, cover Resolution 5 and 7, as Mrs. Lock-Dawson just alluded to, both items, and certainly you have the option of considering both items together in one motion.
On our agendas, Mr. Fine, there are items F3 and F4. Okay.
So very briefly, remind you of the budget and financial reporting cycle. We kind of start in June each year to adopt a budget that covers the fiscal year starting July 1, goes through 6/30, June 30th of each year. And then over the summer following that year, we go through all of our financial reporting processes, and that's closing the books in the year-end process that we do hand in hand with the County Office of Education and with the State of California. What comes to you in September tonight then is the results of the financial closing. So tonight's not a budget report. Tonight's a financial reporting report on our financial performance for last fiscal year that ended June 30th. So does that make sense, kind of where we're at in the cycle of things? Concurrently, we're in a fiscal year operating and updating a current year budget that you'll see the results of a year from tonight, okay? And so I'm going to walk you through by fund, but I'm going to spend the majority of my time on 3 funds and then just highlight the other funds: the general fund, the special reserve fund, and the self-insurance fund. And the reason I focus on those 3 is historically that's where you have focused as a board. General fund for obvious reasons. The special reserve fund because you've had a number of projects going on that are actually funded or accounted for in that fund. And then the self-insurance fund because you've had a long-standing interest in that. So for 13-14, so the period ending last June 30th, this is the general fund, and it's broken down, as you're very familiar with, between unrestricted and restricted. And I'm going to take just a moment and go across the top. Every slide of financial data looks the same here, so if I give you the format at this one, it carries forward on the subsequent pages. We begin the year on July 1 of 13 with a balance that auditors had certified. We brought in a certain amount of revenue. We expended a certain amount of money on salaries and materials and other types of things. We also had other sources and uses, and those are technical terms that the state gives us. A source is money coming in, very similar to revenues, and a use is money going out, very similar to expenditures, but they are classified a little differently. And so we start with the beginning balance, we add revenues, we subtract expenditures, we either add or subtract sources and uses, and we end up with a unaudited ending balance. And that's what you're considering tonight. What makes it audited is the next step of the process when the auditors finish their audit process this fall and come to you in January with their report. But for state reporting purposes, the big, thick report here that is in your binder tonight is what's reported to the county and to the state. Okay, not the audited, but the unaudited portions. For the unrestricted general fund, we ended the year with a roughly $58.8 million. On the restricted side, roughly $23 million for a total of $81.9 million in our ending fund balance. And I'm going to go through that in some detail in just a moment. The other sources and uses is really kind of the anomaly that's on the page. And anomaly is really not the right word. It's something we're very accustomed to. On the restricted side, you can see that we needed to infuse $34 million into the restricted side, and that's to take care of special ed. And you know that as encroachment or a contribution. Where is it coming from? It's coming from the line above, the unrestricted. So the unrestricted general fund contributes to the restricted general fund to cover the amount of special ed expenses that the federal and state agencies don't cover, that we have to cover locally. Why those two numbers don't balance? They're about $5 million different. That $5 million represents other uses for a variety of things, including debt service on certificates of participation and a variety of other types of expenses that the state classifies as a use. There's no abnormal or unusual items there, just pointing that out because I think when you walk away and you take another look at it, if I don't explain it, it'll be an obvious question. So let me spend a little time.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to interrupt very quickly and just let the rest of the board know that the Finance Subcommittee did hear this and review it. So just so that you know. So we're familiar with it, and we didn't get a chance to clarify that initially. But anyway, please continue.
I want to spend the bulk of my few minutes tonight with you on outlining and detailing out the $81.9 million. And so I've prepared a separate page to do that. You can see at the top is the $81.9 million we're talking about. And there are various items on this page that in kind of English or in how you and I think about our operations, we've tried to categorize them in terms that we're familiar with. However, in little print, in the parenthetical comments at the end of each line, there are 5 words that are very important to the state and to our credit agencies and to Wall Street, who loans us money, and to other folks. And these are technically the classifications of our ending fund balance, and there are 5. Non-spendable, and those represent items that we, in essence, have already spent money on, and we can't spend it again. And so I'm going to go give you examples of that in just a moment. Restricted, which you're very familiar with. A variety of funds we receive are restricted for a sole purpose. When we have those left in our fund balance, we must honor those restrictions. Committed, which we've always had, but tonight will be the first time we're actually using it. Assigned, and unassigned. Those are the 5 categories that the Governmental Accounting Standards Board outlines for us to use as an industry government agencies across the United States. So let me walk through some of these. Revolving cash and stores, relatively small portion of the $81 million, but it's non-spendable. It's the value, if we carried pencils in our warehouse, it's the value of the pencils sitting in our stockroom right as of June 30th. A better example than pencils is paper, because we do stock paper. It's the value of the paper sitting on the shelf in our warehouse, as an example. It may also include things like prepaid expenses. Somebody's going on a conference in August. There was an early bird discount. We paid for it in June. It's been prepaid from 1 year, but it benefits another year. It's non-spendable. I can't spend it twice. Designated for economic uncertainties. The board's very familiar with this. This is our state-required reserve level in the general fund. It represents 2% of our outgo. So our expenses and our other uses added together, 2% must be set aside in our reserve. From a federal accounting perspective, they call that part of our unassigned balance, even though the state of California is very specific in that we must have it. Categorical program carryover. You're very familiar with this as restricted monies. So we may receive some type of federal funds that are restricted. We may receive some type of local funds. The largest single piece of this categorical program or restricted category of $23 million is redevelopment money that we've received in the last year. About $6 million of it, of the 23, is associated to the unwinding of redevelopment agencies in our community. school discretionary carryover. This is a category of committed. Each school's allocated funds each year out of the general fund. If they don't spend them, we allow them to carry it over. And we turn right around on 6/30, June 30th, and account for it. And on July 1, in essence, we give it back to them. So on 6/30th, we're going to commit that $1.4 million to give it back to the schools the next morning on July 1st. Okay? So it's an example of committed. And that 1.4 and the line right below it of $152,000 are funds unspent last year at our school sites that we're allowing them to carry forward into the new year. Back in June, you adopted a 3-year local control and accountability plan. It had 3 years worth of commitments in it that included some elements of our fund balance being committed for one-time purposes. So for example, this year it had some technology infrastructure commitments in it. It had, as Mrs. Alavey, I think tonight was alluding to earlier, the South Chiller at Poly 600. We committed almost $1.2 million to replace that. So we took fund balance from last June and we committed to spend that money in a certain way in our LCAP. In fact, we took almost $16 million of our fund balance and committed over the next 3 years, as outlined in the LCAP, to spend those. Next year, we anticipate spending money on grades 3 through 6 English language arts adoption to align to the Common Core. The following year, likely next generation science standards materials, K-12. Those are all called out in the LCAP from a funding source of the fund balance. And so those are committed. You've committed those. Other commitments made may be the electronic time and attendance project, any federal E-rate dollars that we have left over, deferred maintenance. So again, I'm going to use that same example I just used about the South Chiller and the 600 wing at Poly is a deferred maintenance project that you have committed to. Any lottery funds that we've received, we may have committed those as well for another $9.2 million. Medi-Cal administrative activities, we know those as MAW. These are claims we make to the federal government based on surveys that our teachers and other staff fill out several times a year. These are funds that we have in the assigned category. We've not necessarily committed them to a particular purpose, but we have them out there and we do spend the money at school sites on an ongoing basis. However, they're not as committed. They don't have a particular purpose behind them. They're simply assigned. And there's assigned and committed basically are very similar to one another, just the level of commitment, if I can use that term, that is made. Higher level of commitment when we use the committed category, lower level commitment when we use the assigned category. Equipment replacement, this not only includes the trash truck that you're very familiar with, very expensive trash trucks, but also now copy machines at all of our facilities, golf cart replacements at our school sites, any large dollar equipment item that has a useful life to it. We're now monitoring that. We're now monitoring their conditions and have them on a regular replacement schedule. And we're funding some of that out in the future. Other assigned, there's a variety of miscellaneous items in that category. And I should have pointed this out, but in your agenda on page 438 actually are all the details assigned, are all the details related to this page. And then the undesignated, $20 million at the end, is truly just that. It is unassigned and it's undesignated. To date, you have not assigned those funds to any purpose. They are one-time in nature. They're part of our savings account, but they are available for you to appropriate in the way that you see fit. Moving from the general fund, that's the bulk really of what I want to focus on, but now very quickly going through the other funds.
Mr. Fine, can
Yes.
you hold on, please? We do have a question from Mrs. Alavey.
Thank you. I've always had a little bit of a problem with carryover, trying to understand why we would have it. But I noticed that there was a $86,186 Avid carryover. Why wouldn't we want to spend every dime of Avid in its current year? Tell me why we would have such a carryover.
So, Mrs. Alvey, I think most of us would completely agree with you. We want to spend every dime we allocate to the schools on this year's kids. That's always the goal. In this particular case, across our secondary schools that get additional AVID funding out of our general fund, there was $86,000 that wasn't spent for that purpose. And we do allow them to carry it over to a certain extent. They can't carry everything over, but the bulk of it they can carry over. And so across all of our secondary schools, this adds up. The $86,000 reference on page 438 that you're referring to represents that was not spent. I couldn't stand here today. I'd be happy to go back school by school and ask the principals to give me some reasons and share those with you. But when we allocate funds like AVID and other purposes, we do expect them to be spent
Okay.
in the year they're allocated for the kids that they're allocated for.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad we have that policy, but does that distress you to see that?
All of the school site carryover, frankly, distresses me. The simplest way for me to put it in perspective when I'm talking to a principal is if all of your kids are advanced, then I could probably understand why you didn't need all your money.
Okay.
But there are also, in fairness to them, there are a variety of reasons they don't all spend it. Some of them do a very good job of planning. So in the old days when we didn't replace copy machines, a $20,000 copy machine is not something they could have taken a hit in 1 year's budget. So they save a little this year, save a little the next year, save a little the following year. Now they've got their $20,000 to replace their copy machine. That's not a great example right now because we're taking care of that in the equipment replacement process. But that kind of planning we would want to honor and encourage. AVID doesn't have those kinds of purchases in it as an example, but there could be some other items of discretionary nature that are planning. So we have many school sites that are carrying over only a couple $1,000s, and then we have some school sites carrying over tens of thousands. And across our 50 sites, it obviously adds up to a
When we
large
have
number.
one particular site or another that is in that high air category, do we sit down with them?
It's quite the dialogue.
Okay.
And I would tell you, we, over the last several years, made great progress in the trend on bringing carryover down.
Okay.
This year, we reversed that trend. We're not quite sure
Why?
really what the dynamic was. We're in a kind of, some respects, in our best year in many years. So why were we worried? Why was the site worried about their resources when they were actually being increased? But we have had some of those dialogues.
Thank you. Thank you.
Going to move from the general fund now to the special reserve fund. Started the year with $6.2 million, ending the year with 13. Again, redevelopment is playing a role here. That almost that entire increase is a result of liquidating assets in the redevelopment programs. The board's familiar with, we count for redevelopment in a variety of ways depending on whether it was an agreement we had with the city or the county before 1994 versus after, which is why some is accounted for in the general fund, some is accounted for in the special reserve. So there's a whole list of items here, many of which you are familiar with because you've been actively involved. The High Grove Sewer easement is a multi-year project. There's only a small amount of dollars left that we're holding on to. The Littleworth Theater is a project that we're currently going on, but we had set funds aside last year, which meant they're in our fund balance to carry forward, but we're not spending them until this year. Hawthorne, you just heard Michael and Kirk's report on the 7-Eleven committee. Michael talked about for Hawthorne, any sale of that site, the state's entitled to 50% of it. And so the 777 number here is not a magic number. It looks like it's so precise, but it's actually got a lot of different factors in it that makes it a little bit of a weird number. Probably a little high. The value of the site is probably less than $1 million, so the state share is 50% of something less than $1 million. But that's what we're holding right now just in case. Facilities needs assessment is something that you have in the LCAP to think about a future school bond and to do the assessment of facilities and the planning for that. And so it is actually being funded out of this source of funds. Many years ago, almost 8-9 years ago now, we began a study of how to consolidate our administrative activities across the district. We call that Education Center Consolidation Planning. I think the board allocated about $200,000 for that. We've spent 20-some thousand, and we've just been holding on to the additional appropriation, knowing it would come back at some point. You saw that even on the 7-Eleven committee report tonight when they considered the district office in their property list. The next three are a variety of our athletic facility improvements at three schools. What's common among these three schools is that there was some type of redevelopment money or RDA money in those projects. So Poly, Ramona, and Arlington. In some cases, projects finished over the summer, so on June 30th there was a balance left. In other cases, we have some pickup projects going on, specifically at Poly and Arlington, where we're going back and taking care of something that's not right, and we've appropriated money for that. Many years ago, we sold a strip of land next to Rivera Elementary. It can be used for capital purposes. We continue to carry that. And the California Clean Energy Jobs Act is Prop 39 money that's been awarded to RUSD, and we've been out to bid. The Finance Committee heard kind of the story on this. We've been out to bid 2 times already, and we're now on our third, and we're having trouble with one component of the bid, and so we're going to be bidding a third time on the air conditioning component. However, we are proceeding on the lighting element of the projects, and these are the funds we've received to date.
Mr. Fine, we have another question by Mr. Hunt.
Thank you, Ms. Lock-Dawson. Mr. Fine, just on that last one, on a couple of them, I thought we got a little more. I thought we got like $1.9 million in Prop 39 funds.
We probably do, and some's been spent on engineering to get ready for that bid. So some of the projects had to be engineered. There was actually a planning. It's the two things together. There's a planning grant, and I don't recall the detail if this 1.6 has any of the planning money left in it. The planning money's all taken care of. So this is only the construction component. So it was a larger amount. This is what was left on 630.
But we are spending most of the money on switching out to LEDs.
We have to. The regs, I think, have percentage limits on them with regard to planning versus construction.
I do want to commend the staff, Mr. Williams. I know we're one of the few school districts. I think the state has set aside over $300 million in these funds, and I think to date, last I heard, they've only sent out about $70 million. And Riverside Unified is one of the few that
we were the first,
got their stuff in, and
the first district in the state.
All that. So I think our staff needs commendation for that. Mike, let me ask you a question. You know, I've been pounding my head for 2 years against a wall, hoping that a baseball backstop net would fall out, and to cost $60,000. Are you saying that we could use this money instead of Prop B money for that? This Arlington cleanup money?
So, Mr. Hunt, the 276 is spoken for.
It's spoken for.
It is, the bulk of that is a
I trust it. It's spoken.
Roof structure over the pool equipment.
Oh, yeah.
That it's going to be the fanciest roof we've ever seen in the district, I think. It's got all kinds of requirements, including sprinkler, and it's got chemicals in the pool equipment. So to clean up that what is in essence was a shed over the Arlington pool equipment. It's right, for those of you familiar with Arlington, it's right in the middle of the improvements we made. We made $14 million worth of improvements, and right smack in the middle of all those improvements is the pool equipment with this really kind of nasty looking shed over it. And so we embarked on what we thought was a very simple project to take the shed out and kind of clean it up and make it nice. And DSA and some others have just really kind of...
What kind of restrictions, if there are any, on the use of the sale of the Rivera land strip?
Just capital purposes. So purchasing other land or constructing a building, it would be examples.
What about improvement in a building?
As long as it's a facility improvement, qualifies for capital.
Well, I know that Mrs. Allaby and her committee have worked very hard on the Littleworth design. We're talking about trying to raise the money in the public, do bake sales. Can't we just transfer X that she needs from that into the Littleworth?
Mr. Hunt, I wouldn't describe the scope of work we're doing in the theater lobby as really capital. It's the funding for the Littleworth theater is not a problem. We have $8,000 left from last year. We have additional funds this year. I'm not aware that we're at all short on that project.
I thought we were short.
No.
BB&K is making a donation to cover the mural aspect of it. I would just, Mr. Hunt, I think I do recall what you're speaking of. I don't know that that's it was a shortage as much as there was an unwillingness to spend as much as one scope. It wasn't necessarily a shortfall of funding, it was just sticker shock.
The estimated cost of what was
like
recommended
40.
was ridiculously expensive, and the committee rejected it.
Okay, and what is the undesignated money? What is that?
Just what it says. Just like on the general fund, you have not appropriated it yet. In this case, you've not appropriated these funds yet. They are capital in nature, so they can only be used for capital. The bulk of that $8 million came from backing up. The big increase here from one year over to the other was from redevelopment. The bulk of it is redevelopment money just falling to the bottom line.
So if we decided, I'm not saying we do this, but like at Miller, we put in a running track for the kids when we built the school?
Yes.
And if we decided we wanted to do that at Shamau or a university or something, we could use these funds?
Yes, I would. So consistent with our conversation the other day in the committee, we need to make a decision whether we want to honor the original redevelopment purposes or not. And if we do, then follow that list of acceptable expenses. And if we don't, then it is available for any capital purposes.
I do want to say, it was a very good report that Dr. Hanson and Mr. Fine provided us Monday morning last. We met at 7:30. I think it's the most enlightening that I've had since I've been on the board, or maybe I just woke up, but one of the two, but it's very thorough as we go along. I would hope this to be part of a retreat so the board can understand what tools they have at their use. And because there are things we all see, particularly as we move into wards and we become more involved with our own campuses, as brought up, that we have all campuses. So thank you, Mr. Fine. I appreciate your answers.
Okay, we also have another question from Mrs. Alavi. No. Okay, it was answered. Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. Fine.
I'm going to move on then to the last fund that I want to focus any attention on. That's the self-insurance fund. Fairly consistent year over year. Started at 38 and ended at 39. The breakdown, this is presented a little different than the others because in the self-insurance world we do have requirements placed upon us, and so we identify what the requirements are and then we identify what we're reserving. For the first three categories, workers' compensation incurred but not reported, the requirement of 7.9, we're reserving 7.9. Property and liability requirement is a locally set requirement of 1.7, we're reserving 1.7. Health and welfare, self-insured health and welfare medical plans incurred but not reported, 2.9 million as of a year ago, and we're reserving 2.9 million. And then GASB 45, other post-employment benefits, a requirement actuarial as of June 21st of this year of 77 million, and we have 26.5 million reserved towards that. All of the...
Sorry, Mrs. Cloud?
Can we stay on that one for a second? During the lean years that we've had in the past few years, the requirement for GASB has been reduced, correct, to the districts? And so explain to me the discrepancy between the requirement and the reserve.
So the requirement actually hasn't been reduced, it's continued to grow. What we decided locally during the fiscal crisis is we would stop making a contribution to this reserve. And so starting, I won't be precise about the year, but I think it was our very first year of the fiscal crisis, so 07-08, we stopped making our annual contribution. Prior to that, we had made 26 million in contributions. We basically haven't made any. The fund balances a little because we do have retirees out there who we have to pay benefits for. And we received some funds to do that. So the fund has fluctuated a little by a couple $100,000 over the last few years, but the 26.5 million is what, in essence, what we had contributed to this fund up to 07-08.
Is that what will happen if we don't meet the requirement of 77 million? And do we have a time span to reach that, or?
So the requirement...
And is that typical of other districts?
Yes, very typical. We're in better shape than most on this item. The easiest way for me to explain this without getting really detailed is there's a requirement that we do the actuarial and we value our liability, the 77 million, and that we report that. and that it shows up on our balance sheet as a liability. There is not a requirement that we fund it. Okay? There's a desire to fund it because you're going to have a mismatch. You're going to pay it out at some point in time. So the fact that it's not fully funded is not a violation of anything. Wall Street does look at it when they rate our bonds, and when we go to them for ratings on our bonds, it's 10 minutes of an hour-long conversation with the credit agencies and so on. So certainly of concern to them, but there's an understanding of our ability to do that. The original pronouncements asked us to fund it over 30 years. And those pronouncements are now, was 03 maybe, 2003, so they're now 8 years old or so towards that 30 years.
So what happens if we have an unusual amount of retirees in the next 10 years, like
Sure.
much more than projected?
So what the 77 represents, and again, I'm really oversimplifying a very complex
Please do.
accounting mechanism here, but the 77 represents all current employees retiring at once, and it's the assumption that they're all eligible to retire and receive post-retirement health benefits. The reality is of 5,200 employees, only so many retire each year, right? But if we were to go out of business, which school districts don't usually do, if everybody were to turn 55 or 58 and retire at once, which is not what our population is, then we would be exposed to that full amount at one time. This is an actuarial number. It is the value of our exposure to all of our current employees. Some are 30 years away from retirement. Some are 8 months away from retirement. And so it's a value, and it's an estimate for those that are 30 years away from retirement, what health costs will be 30 years from now.
So we are required to pay, if our employee meets retirement criteria at 55, we are required to pay for their health benefits until they reach age 65.
Actually, no. Our collective bargaining agreement with our employees is for 8 years.
Okay,
So if they retire it, and then until they are Medicare eligible.
65.
Either Medicare eligible or 8 years.
So
So
we're
8 years
paying,
maximum.
we're paying the benefits, correct, for that time period.
For the single person. So we don't
Right,
continue to-
not family, just for the single employee, retired employee. Okay, thank you.
The next, slide 7, is all the other operating funds that I didn't just talk about, because remember, I just highlighted 3 funds for you because you've always had a stronger level of interest there. Adult Ed, Child Development, Cafeteria, Bond Interest and Redemption, Debt Service, and Foundation Trust. All those other funds are reported here. And then same with building-related funds. Deferred Maintenance, which is no longer a fund, which is why it has 0 now at the end, because the deferred maintenance program is gone in the state of California, so there's no longer a separate fund ending last year. The building fund, which is Measure B, the capital facilities fund, and the state building fund, which is any state contributions that we have towards our projects. And then finally, or not finally, there's one more page. If you add everything up I've just shown you, the district started with about $174 million in resources. We brought in just over $400 million of additional resources. We spent $393. We had other sources of $100,000, ending with $182 million. And I'm going to take you back to the general fund, that 81.9 or $82 million. So $82 million of the $182 million is the general fund, and $100 million are all the other activities in the district.
Mr. Hunt has a question.
Just on back on the ending fund balance, Mr. Fine, we talked a little bit about this in committee, but the $300,000 that's in the foundation trust.
Yes, sir.
Those are scholarship monies, et cetera. Some of them, I guess, are endowments and they would go off the interest. But at a future time, do you think your staff can make a report to Finance Committee that could then go on, maybe even have a Communications Committee look at it? I want to do the right thing, but I would hate to have any money that could be given to a student, Mrs. Wood's daughter back there, going off to college and who needs it,
Thank you.
The final slide is basically debt that the district owes. You're very familiar with our general obligations bonds, or Measure B. We paid about $4 million on those bonds this past year. We'll pay another about $4.5 million this next year. We owe about $143 million. We have certificates of, that didn't come out right at all. We have certificates of participation, 2 different ones that remain outstanding, just about $12 million. We're paying about $700,000 a year on those. We have other debt, and we covered that back on the insurance slide of incurred but not reported, about $7 million. We have net OPEB obligations. Now, this really gets technical, but this is a subset of that $77 million that we just talked about for other post-employment. This is the subset related to our current retirees. Okay? And then compensated absences are those classified employees who have vacation on the books that should they depart in some way we would be obligated for, totaling about $4.8 million. Gives you an idea of where we're at as a district debt-wise. And as I started, Mrs. Lock-Dawson, if we combine the 2 resolutions, let me speak only to the second one now. I just covered the year-end financial performance for last year. The second resolution that's before you is the GAN limits. It is a technical process that you adopt a GAN limit every year. You do that tonight for this year that we're in right now. You estimate what it's going to be, and you true up the estimate you did a year ago based on the financial data I just reported to you. So this second resolution does 2 things. It trues up last year's estimate from exactly a year ago tonight, and it sets the new estimate for this year. And then a year from now, we'll true up the estimate you set tonight and set a new estimate for the following year. GAN limits do play a role with school districts, but not at the current time, actually not in history here in Riverside. We've never exceeded our appropriations limit.
So do the board members know what resolutions we're passing here tonight? One is to approve expenses to meet up the difference between what our estimated expenses are and what our actual expenses are for the year. And the other resolution is to increase the limit by which we can do that.
On Resolution 5.
On Resolution 5.
Right. On Resolution 10, which is F3, it also does 3 things. It certifies the financial data I just reported to you. And I should have done this at the beginning, I'm sorry.
That's right, yeah.
It certifies the financial data. It establishes new appropriations based on truing up our estimates from last June to today. So last June when you adopted the budget, we estimated what last year's financial performance would be. And we missed that estimate by about $2 million. So it trues up that $2 million. And the third thing it does, the items that I highlighted for you that are committed, it basically resolves that those in fact are committed dollars for those purposes.
So we have two action items, 2 resolutions to pass. Mr. Hunt?
As a member of the Budget Committee, I would, if you're taking both F3 and F4 in one motion, then I would ask for approval.
Okay.
I'd motion for F3 and F4 for board approval.
I'll second that.
All right, Mr. Hunt motions to approve resolutions 5 and 10, which are items F3 and F4, and Mrs. Alavi seconds that motion. So please vote when your light flashes green. All right, Mr. Fine, you have authority to go spend. Thank you. Thanks for laying that out so clearly.
Yes.
It's very helpful. We talked about, too, in our budget subcommittee about having board workshops on this because it was so helpful for us to sit down for an hour and a half with Mr. Fine and Dr. Hansen and talk about the universe of spending within the district, particularly now in the new era of LCAP. So it was helpful. All right, next item is item F5, 5, that is the election of members to Riverside County Committee on the School District Organization for the 1st, 2nd, and 5th supervisorial districts and members at large. And I think we had some recommendations, or I think we had some existing members. So the question would be, is there any kind of staff report for this? Or Dr. Hanson, do you want to speak to it? The election of members to the Riverside County Committee on School District Organization. So this is RCOE. We had this discussion as well. Did you want to talk about that, or is there another staff member that might?
Yes, we did. We did talk about this. Mrs. Cloud, I believe that you have represented, and you go there to represent the school board, and would like to bring this to you this evening to see if there's any nominations, so that Mrs. Cloud can go in and provide the nomination from our school board to the greater committee.
And Mrs. Cloud, there are existing members, correct? Or there's some opening? Would you like to?
Correct. There's some opening, and this has always been a little fuzzy for me, even when I go there. And I think Mr. Hunt and whoever else is, and the representatives kind of feel that way. But we have some openings. As you said, in those districts. District 1 is Kevin Jeffries' district. 2 is John Tavaloni's, and the 5th is Marion Ashley's. And so, if anybody, if my colleagues or Dr. Hanson has a suggestions, we can actually nominate somebody from District 1 and request that they fill out the form and everything that is available to them. But they have to be nominated from the floor as well. So, this is, if you haven't, it is an important position because they decide on boundaries and things like that and transfers between districts. So,
Mrs. Cloud, I'm sorry, this is RCOE's, correct, right?
Yes,
this is the
right. This is county,
the greater universe.
Yes,
of the
it
school
is.
districts.
And I thought of who lives out in that area. I think like Lori Byers does. I'm not sure that she would be interested in participating in this. And but I think we're open to suggestions. So if anybody has any suggestions to give me, even if they don't get the information by, I think the date is October 10th, I can nominate from the floor on the 27th. Although the only problem is everybody votes, and if I don't have any information to give them, they might not take my word for it. So, and there's an at-large position too.
What date would you like, if any of the members up here have any recommendations, or anybody from the audience has any recommendations?
Well, please forward the information to our office by October 7th of 2014, which is what the county has suggested. So if there's anybody we can contact that we think might be interested before then, between now and then, that would be helpful. And then even if we think of somebody late, I think we can still nominate from the floor. But, they wouldn't have any biomaterials or anything.
Do you, are you coordinating those? Who's coordinating the nominations then? Would you take those forward, or is that something that Dr. Hanson, we would have folks give to you and you would pass on to RCOE? Is that?
You can go ahead and email me, and then what I'll do is I'll pass them on to RCOE, or then Mrs. Cloud can take them. If we get them after the October deadline, she can do the nomination right there on the floor.
Okay.
And by the way, some of these members are sitting school board members, which my preference is to get community members and other folks out there, involved. So there might be somebody nominated from Elsinore and some of those other districts that include one that I don't know about.
Okay.
So,
Mr. Hunt has a question or a comment.
I think Ms. Cloud makes a good point. Some other districts seem to want to, I don't know why, what power there is, they seem to want to stack it with their own school board members. And but you recall that a couple of years ago, we nominated, appointed, and she won Dr. Rainey. And then when she won the RCOE position, she had to vacate. That's why that one position is vacated. I don't quite, is Mrs. De Silva still?
I understand she is. She's still on the committee.
Okay. I will have someone that I will advance, let me check with them, that expressed an interest to me. in education governance. So let me talk to that person, and if there is, I'll ask her to fill this out and get it to Mrs. Cloud.
All right, thank you. And that goes for anybody else too, if they have anybody they'd like to bring forward, recommend in those districts. I'm assuming they have to be residents of the districts that the supervisorial
there's an
districts.
at-large too. Yeah.
There's
Yeah,
there's
there
one
is an
at-large.
at-large position available as well.
So there's actually 4 positions available then.
Well,
First, second, and fifth, and at-large.
I think we can only nominate from our districts, isn't that correct?
So that's
Yeah.
first and second. We have both.
We can nominate from all 4?
Yeah.
All 4 cover a piece of our district. Even 5 is the High Grove area.
Oh, that's
Really?
Supervisor Ashley's, yeah, that's right. Okay, well, I guess that settles
So
that.
I guess the action would be we're not taking action at this time, because it is an action item.
Let's see. Well, we don't have an action.
I move to table
Yeah.
to our next regular set meeting.
Yeah, okay. We'll table that and we'll bring members forward to the
Second.
next meeting. All right, we have a motion and a second to table item F5 by Mr. Hunt and Mrs. Alavi. Please vote. Oh, sorry. I'm not thinking, I'm at the end of the meeting. We don't need to vote. Well, yes, we do. We have a motion to table.
For tabling it.
Okay. Well, just all those in favor, raise your hand, please.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion carries. All right. Okay, at the end of the meeting here, board members' comments. We are at the end of our meeting. Mr. Hunt, would you like to go first tonight?
I don't know if I'd like to, but I will.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. It was a good meeting, and I appreciate particularly the 2 staff reports and the hard work that Haley and others put in, and also Mike and his staff, Sandy, others on the budget report. I'm going to propose a resolution to go to our bylaws, and I'm going to take direction from our president of how she would like to proceed on that, because we have to vote on it, obviously. But either I can write up an outline and ask Dr. Hanson to have his staff or the attorney draft something, or he can take my comments tonight and do the same. My resolution would talk about board service and the board offices. We had a debate last year as to whether we rotate with a clerk, vice president, president, or whether we don't. I feel that rotation is an important part of good governance in that it creates equity and collaboration. And except for a matter of egregious fault that we saw in Moreno Valley, and we will never see in Riverside, but except for a matter like that, or if someone elects not to want to take the position, I would say that we would set up a way that we rotate. And it's got to do a little bit of thinking, and you'd almost have to, Mrs. Cloud, as Mr. Lee was coming on, Mrs. Cloud is leaving the chair, so when is Mr. Lee in line under that rotation? However, I'd also like to have a clause in there. When we begin to look around our city and even at our nation's capital, when folks seem to, at least to the perception of the public, use their public position for political purposes, that's always distressing. And we don't, particularly dealing with our mission is children and their education, we don't want that one thing to ever happen that would somehow bring discredit to that person and or to the board and the work they're trying to do. So we would resolve that should the vice president, and in this case the example would be me, would be up to be the next president, that they would be frozen in the seat, or they could elect to walk away. But they would be frozen in the seat until after the election. If they're reelected, then they can be the president next year. Otherwise, unless the clerk is also up for reelection, she or he would jump to the president's spot. And if she or he is up for reelection, then one of the members who's not, obviously, would.
You're talking about election to the, not to the executive committee, but election at large in your trustee area.
Right.
Okay.
I will be up, if I was made president by my peers in the December meeting in 2015, November, I'll be up for reelection. I don't want to be president when I'm up for reelection because I don't want the misunderstanding of anything I do, because the bylaws say the president speaks for the board. So Ruth
So-
falls in or something, he speaks, she speaks.
Okay.
I don't want that misinterpreted as a political.
So I think that's a wonderful idea, and I would ask maybe Dr. Hansen to take this up, and I don't know if that's a communications committee activity, or I'm not quite sure where that falls, and staff, I've just been told.
I can
Staff
give an
will take
outline
care
of
of
my
it.
ideas, and then if your legal
And bring
source-
it back to us when it's agendized, and we can discuss it. Okay?
I had the
Anything else,
opportunity
Mr.
to have a nice evening with my wife over at Mariana Robles' house and with her husband, whose name I will murder, Jose Woodka. Jose is professor of physics, but he's also the chair of the academic senate at UCR. On his account, he's offered, we talked about STEM and the need to be closer. He, in a very, very respectful way, explained that we need to be talking to the provost, not so much the chancellor. So he's going to set up a meeting for Mrs. Lock-Dawson and I, or whoever you designate Mrs. Lock-Dawson, and Dr. Hansen to meet the provost and see that. Mariana brought up some ideas that Mr. Martin tonight echoed, and I do look forward to the workshops we've talked about on Common Core, that it really does need a discussion about how we may restructure elementary education delivery. And her ideas was, and it's a little radical, but it's a whole new day, would be that you wouldn't go to Mrs. Smith's second grade class and where you get reading, writing, arithmetic, art, and everything. You would go to Mrs. Smith's English class, and then you would go to Mrs. Allavy's art class, and then you would, almost like we do, what's the word I want, Judy? Thank you, ma'am. So I think it's an interesting discussion, and one who's, as Mrs. Cloud was talking about, we need to be sure that we're implementing this right and we're not overburdening, but we're challenging our teachers. And I had a very nice time this week. Got to go with Dr. Hansen to meet with our CAC, which is of our special ed parents, organized by Mrs. Paredes on the implementation of Common Core. I forgot the name of our teacher at Gage, Judy, that was there that gave the Terry. Andy, yeah, Terry Andy. But yeah, Andy just did, as he always does, if you know him over at Gage, just did a wonderful job. And on behalf of all of you, I hope I did seek, in my short remarks, just to underscore the board's strong commitment to these children, their children, and to them. And I think the CAC will help parents who find themselves challenged like this to have a place where others are. And I would also like, I'm impressed with the 7-Eleven committee, and I've asked Ms. Lock-Dawson if we can invite them back, with everyone's okay, to recognize them with something special we can make at our shops. But again, this is a very important committee for the governance of our district, and we were very fortunate. Dr. Lewis has put together, just all of us put together some really good citizens to address that, and I'd like to have them recognized. So those remarks. Thank you, Mrs. Lock-Dawson.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. Mrs. Cloud?
A couple of comments. I do think, and since it's not agendized, we can't really talk about it now, but Mr. Hunt's idea of resolution for rotation does require some real thought, and the flexibility that we've had has served us well, because we've not encountered some of the things that Moreno Valley and some of the others have. So I just think we need to give it a whole lot of thought. I also think that we should send thank yous not only to the 7-Eleven committee, but to both committees and the people that are involved who take their time and service. We had a chance to, I know several of us did, to go to the CSEA welcome, and that was kind of fun. Yes, yay, CSEA. And I think it was a great idea that they invited the new employees and some of the board and staff to come out and visit. And probably the most important discussion that I've had in the last few weeks is we had an instruction subcommittee meeting, which has not been finalized, on DLI and transitional kindergarten. We raised a lot of questions and didn't really have all the answers that we thought might be effective. Mr. Lee most especially. And so there was a robust conversation with staff saying they would go back and look at some of the things that we talked about and bring it back to us. We're on somewhat of a timeline, but at this point we don't really have, we felt, the ability to offer DLI in transitional kindergarten for a number of reasons at this point, because everything hasn't been worked out. I'm willing to, I think we're willing to look at the options, but at this point there were more questions than there were answers. So I hope I expressed it well. I'm looking forward to coming back. Those kinds of robust conversations are actually a lot of fun and very enlightening. So that's what you call critical thinking in practice. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Cloud. Mrs. Alavi?
Thank you. I just know that there are a lot of jobs in the school district which are kind of thankless. So tonight I'm just going to reach out and thank one person, which is Mr. Walker, and tell him that he does a great service when he handles things like people who have transfer students September 12th and want to get into a school that's closed, and he has to handle that. And I just want to say thank you, because those are not easy, and somebody has to do those things, and we sort of take it for granted that somebody's doing those things. But I really appreciate you, Mr. Walker, and you get some hard jobs, but I appreciate the job you do. Thank you.
Is that it, Mrs. Alavi? Okay, Mr. Lee.
A couple things. Thank you, President Lock-Dawson. I was reminded when Mr. Martin was up here how lucky we are as a board to work in a district where all of our employee groups and staff and the board all can get along and communicate well and respectfully. One of the things my father-in-law, who's a retired principal, told me when I was thinking about trying to sit in this chair was that his experience in 30 years as a principal was the most successful districts that work best with students are the ones that work best with their employee groups, because that just kind of sets the tone throughout the whole organization. And when you have 50,000 students, or students, teachers, and staff working together, you really need that trust. And so I thank Mr. Martin and Mr. Rudd and CSEA and all the teachers and Susan and your staff for the trust that has been built. And it's been great since I've been on the board, but I just see it improving more and more. And you see it when the teachers union president comes up and speaks so highly of the relationships that's happening in our district. And I know that's all benefiting our students, which is why we're all here. So thank you all. And the other thing I wanted to mention, which I failed to mention the last meeting during my board comments, was that Dr. Hanson and I were participating in the Mayor's Maker Forum, his first Maker Forum, which highlighted a particular business in town called Vocademy. And I'm sure many of you have heard of Vocademy. It's a makerspace over off Spruce. Entrepreneur Gene Sherman has created it. And I think it's something it's worth exploring a partnership with the district. One of the reasons why I wanted to participate on the board was to create a better K-12 experience for our students. And I think we offer a lot of opportunities academically for our students to achieve, and supporting our students in completing the A through G requirements so they're prepared for college but also career. And I know the A through G requirements can help with the career as well. But last year, I think about 40% of our students were completing A through G, so that leaves 60% of our students that need some help. And I think this is one way where we can reach out to those students and engage those students that are looking for a more hands-on experience, and not necessarily to replace the academic experience that we're providing, but just to further support the experience that they're providing. Gene from Vocademy is a perfect example of this. Super smart guy, entrepreneur, go-getter, passionate, very skilled laborer, nationally recognized maker. Never went to college. Took a couple classes, just wasn't for him. Very successful man. And he got that experience in high school. And his shop teacher at the time wouldn't let him participate in shop unless he got his grades up. So I think that there's ways we can create an environment in our district and provide more opportunities in the hands-on world, and whether that is offering students opportunities to go to Vocademy, creating maker spaces at our schools, having the staff at Vocademy maybe train some teachers that are willing to learn to try to replace some of our shop teachers that are leaving, and also look at other things, not just the traditional shop experience that many of us experienced. But, I mean, if you go take a tour of Vocademy like I did last week, I mean, it's amazing the machinery that they have there and the opportunities they have with 3D printing and CAD and sewing and machining. I can see students being really excited about going to school if they had those kinds of opportunities at their fingertips. So I appreciate, I sent an email to Dr. Hansen this week asking him to further the conversation with Gene and others that participate in this world. And he graciously is going to meet with Gene and myself. But I just wanted to let the board know and the audience know what I plan on working and spending some time on, because it's something I really believe in. I think it's something that can really benefit students. So I thank you again, Dr. Hansen, for agreeing to that meeting. And I think that is all I have. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. I'm glad you brought up the Vocademy, and I'm glad to hear you're carrying that forward. I brought it up last year as well, and I went to their grand opening when they had it, because I have 3 makers in my home that enjoy that. And I talked to Dr. Miller about partnerships, because I see it as it's an external classroom that we don't have. And they have the machinery in there and the ability for our kids to get some of that hands-on experience is great. So I'm so glad you did that. And I know they're having a maker fair on October 4th at that facility too, so I'll be there with some kids. I also wanted to say I wanted to apologize for missing the CSEA welcome, because I was at a mandatory parent meeting for the STEM Academy, and nothing less than a threat of death. I could not miss that meeting, so I had to go. I apologize, and it was at the same time. So, and I was there for 3 hours. So, so thank you, though. Please keep on inviting us, because we enjoy those things. I did allude a little bit a while ago to the Common Core. I know we've got a workshop coming up, Mrs. Paredes. Pardon me, when is it? Okay, study session on Common Core. One of the things I know I've been hearing a lot about, sort of the uneven, sort of kind of referencing some of the stuff Mr. Martin was talking about too, uneven application, about how some of the things are being successful, particularly math, maybe less successful than others. So I'm hoping when we have that study session that we really take a hard look at what's working and what's not, so that we can adapt as a district to making sure we're implementing it well and providing our teachers the support they need outside of professional development, but what else we need. So, Mrs. Paredes, I hope we get to hear a little bit about kind of a real hard look at not just everything's grand in the world of Common Core, but here's what we've heard were legitimate criticisms, and this is what we recommend perhaps we look at as a district, and here's what's working well. So I'm sure you will provide us with that, as you always do such a good job. So thank you. And then I also, just in closing, since Mrs. Alavi was thanking Mr. Walker, I want to thank him as well, but because I pass all my dirty laundry to you with parents that ask for that kind of stuff. So thank you. And I'd also like to thank Jackie Paul, who I think is also one of our unsung heroes in the district, who takes a lot of crazy calls during the week from the press and that sort of thing, and then also manages to do a good job in the district. So I appreciate that. And also to comment that we've got our College and Career Fair coming up on October 1st. And we've got our second annual Pathways to College on October 4th, right? So we'll go right from there over to the Vocademy. Okay. So that's all I have to say, but thank you, Jackie. You do a wonderful job for the district, as do everybody in here. I wish I could go around and thank everybody. So tonight we do want to adjourn our meeting in honor of Mr. Ed Rush. He passed away on September 5th. And he was a former teacher and principal of different schools for many years in RUSD, so some of you may know Mr. Rush. So tonight we're going to close the meeting in his honor. Thank you very much.